Now, as you may know, the Irish Times has been running a project which tells the story of Ireland in 100 objects. It's now drawing to a close, with people being asked to vote on the 100th and final item, an object which will attempt to encapsulate Ireland in the 21st century. We're joined by Fintan O Toole from the Times. Afternoon, Fintan.
Good afternoon, Sean.
The other 99 objects, have they been asked to represent different eras in Irish history, or how has it been broken down?
Yeah, so the other 99, I've just done them myself, so they're my selection.
Oh, right, okay.
And that's not because I'm saying I'm the world expert on all this stuff. It's just somebody has to decide.
Yes.
When you get into, we actually thought about like setting up a panel, and of course you find that you start talking about experts that don't agree with each other about anything anyway, you know. So it ended up as, look, somebody just has to really kind of do a selection. You could easily do a completely separate 100 objects, you know, but what I simply wanted to do, first of all, I stole the idea from the British Museum. I really should confess that. It was a brilliant idea. They did a history of the world in 100 objects.
Okay.
And it's really lovely, you know, and you can go into the museum and you can kind of follow through. It's a great idea. So I thought, well, of course, the world is nothing. I mean, Ireland's really the most important thing, really, isn't it? We all agree. So,
but of course, yes.
But I also thought, actually, maybe, you know, a lot of people are very vague about chronology, about, like, you know, did the Normans come before the Vikings or after, you know? And I just thought, actually, you know, it might be just a really simple way, in one way, of just kind of reminding people of more or less the chronology of people on the island. Because actually we're quite short. It's quite a short time we're here. It's really odd. Like, you have people in the south of England like 300,000 years ago. You have nobody here until 10,000 years ago. So it's actually quite a short history. And so the idea was really just, you know, pick 100 objects that you can follow the thing through. Hopefully the objects themselves are really interesting, either very beautiful or significant or resonant in some way. But also, if you follow it through, you'll get a fairly good grasp of more or less the course of Irish history. So we kind of, I've written 99 of them. We're only on number 90, I think, this week in the paper, but I've written them ahead, and we come up to then, what should the last one be? And I thought, well, who knows better what the last one should be than actually the public know this. You know, this isn't an expert thing, because this is the times we've lived through. Really, we're talking about 21st century Ireland. And so the idea was, okay, try and engage the public with this, because the National Museum, are actually very interested in this themselves. So they thought, okay, we will acquire the thing that people pick. So it's not just a sort of abstract exercise. It's also, they find it really interesting. They will acquire this object, and it will be in the museum forever as the thing that people in 2012, at least, thought best represented contemporary Ireland.
Yes. Yeah, but of course that's a snapshot in time, really, in terms of how people are feeling now.
Absolutely. No, it's really well worth saying that. You know, that I suppose what you're trying to ask people to do is almost an impossible thing, which is kind of almost look forward 100 years and then look back. So try to think, if you were going to the National Museum in 100 years, what would you expect to see if there was only one thing you could see from the 10 years of Ireland since the last 12 years, say, roughly since the turn of the century? What's the thing you would really expect to see there? So what we did was we drew up, we kind of put it in the paper and asked people for suggestions, and then drew up a short list of 10 things. And the fabulous thing is that the museum they've done a great job with it now. They have acquired the 10 things.
All right, okay.
It's on exhibition. So from today, you can go up to Collins Barracks, and it's actually beautifully laid out. And they're the real object. So it's not a digital thing or anything else. It's the actual thing. So, for example, the actual Anglo-Irish Bank sign from the Anglo-Irish Bank headquarters is there. Jean Butler. Where
did they find that? Because I'd say that probably a lot of people thought, God, I'd love to own that.
Well, it was actually kind of funny in a terribly sad way, which was it now belongs to the Irish Bank Resolution Corporation, which took over Anglo. You know, so I know the museum got on to the IBRC, who were very helpful in that. But the thing that I found kind of funny and sad was they had to sign a very detailed loan agreement for getting the sign. You know? I think, wouldn't it have been nice if there were a few good loan agreements actually being run by the bank 10 years ago? We might be able to
So they lent it to them rather than they gave it to them.
And then the idea then is that when this process is finished, there's about a month that people can go and see the stuff. They can vote at the museum. They can also vote online. And so when the object is picked, it's going to go, there'll be a book coming out in March. This will be the object that will go in the book, but also it's going to be acquired permanently by the museum as an object that represents our time.
And just, I suppose, go through the 10 finalists. First communion dress. I assume a lot of people chose that to represent the excess of the Celtic
Well,
tiger.
it was a kind of a mix of things. I think the idea behind the first communion dress was sort of two thoughts, really. One was that they became more and more elaborate over time, these kind of very elaborate things. But also, in a way, it also represents one of the big things that happened over the last 10, 15 years, which is the decline of the church, in a way. That it might seem paradoxical, but you know, the church became this thing increasingly that people used for their own social reasons, rather than necessarily as an institution that they were entirely devoted to. And possibly, you know, if people were to look back over, because especially in the context of, I think that's about 10,000 years, you know, Christianity and Catholicism, you know, has been so much at the centre of Irish life for so long, that actually what's happened over the last decade, you know, where you're down to mass attendance rates now of 30-40%, you know, that's a huge social shift in itself.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, that choice for that, in the sense that Christianity, when it came here, was no different. Usurped older pagan rituals and used them for their own purposes, and communion, which was a Catholic ritual, was kind of usurped then as a secular social financial ritual.
Very much so. You know, it's another form of display. It's almost like a kind of mini wedding, you know, and we started spending on the weddings. So, you know, actually, when you look at these objects, they actually, you know, it's amazing how one object can actually contain a lot of different strands, you know. So you've got the decline of the church, you've got the rise of consumerism. I think exactly what you're saying, which actually would make it a very good object as part of the 100, because a lot of the very early objects that you see are Christian objects which echo the pre-Christian religion. You know, it's a very much an Irish thing, actually, that we don't ever seem to go from one thing to the other. You know, we just sort of slightly bury the old thing, and it sort of emerges, you know, just underfoot. It's always there.
Well, it's kind of like our attitude to abortion. No one's, you know, most people aren't against it, but we don't really want to have it. So sort of,
I mean, the writer Transilvane, I think, I remember a phrase he was writing about the English. He said the English are mono and the Irish are stereo. You know, we're always stereo. There's always at least two channels at the same time.
On the one hand, Jean Butler's Riverdance dress would strike me as cheating, because that's the late 90s.
Yes, which is a very good point. The point about this really was that it represents the globalization of Irish culture, really, which as a phenomenon really took off, I suppose, in this century. So if you look at, like if you go to Chicago, I remember being in Chicago fairly recently, you know, at an event, and they bring out the Irish dancers, you know, almost all of whom were African American, almost all of whom were wearing these incredibly elaborate Celtic, in inverted commas, dresses with the wigs. You know, it's partly kind of Riverdance, but it's what Riverdance set off, I suppose, in terms of what people's idea of Irishness is, which is now a very, very globalized, you know, very mixed, very consumerist one in many ways, but arguably still has some kind of connection with the traditional culture. So again, it's a very lovely thing in itself. One of the things it sort of serves as is a bit of a rebuke, because actually when you look at the original dress, it's sexy and it's lovely, but it's quite plain. It's relatively simple. Yeah. You know? And when you think of what's become of all that, I suppose that's the story, really. We took something simple and made it very, very elaborate.
It's kind of like Italian food. You can't actually get it in Italy. Because most Italians don't recognise it as Italian food. The euro, though, is that, I suppose it's part of Ireland being part of Europe, but
that's huge.
Not specifically about Ireland, though.
No, well, you see, it doesn't have to be specifically about Ireland. It's because we're a globalised country now. That's one of the points. I mean, one of the things we've got in it, like for example, is the smartphone. You couldn't leave out a smartphone, or, you know, I mean, it's so much part of our culture now. It's not a specifically Irish object, but you know, even going back over the history of the 100 objects, you know, you've often got objects that are showing foreign influence or are imported. You know, it's really, you know, an island isn't just this kind of little sealed off thing, and never has been, you know. So I think it's fair enough to reflect those things. The euro, I mean, arguably, if we were to say, well, is there one thing that has had more effect on us over the last 10 years than anything else, it is the euro, because it was the cheap money. You know, so it's okay, it's about European identity and all that, but it was the cheap money that flooded into the country. What were Anglo lending? They were lending euros, and they were able to do that because they were able to borrow from German and French banks and British banks, but largely Eurozone banks. This kind of huge flood of cheap money, which kind of drove us all crazy.
And because you've written a small article about it and talked about the logo and harking back to ancient Greece. So I suppose it resonates in some direction. Bad omen. Other suggestions include a hospital bed, the patio heater, which is a clever one, the decommissioned weapon, and Katie Taylor's gloves, which I suppose is the most recent one. And a lot of them kind of have that little sort of tinge of bitterness or regret to them.
They do. I mean, it's unavoidable, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and oddly enough, it's kind of very strange. I mean, in one way, the most positive object is the most horrible, which is the AK-47. You know, this, by the way, is the first time anybody in Ireland outside of very small circles will have seen a decommissioned weapon. Remember, we've never actually seen one, because if you remember, the whole process, the IRA was very sensitive about it. Wasn't to be photographed even.
Yeah.
So we've never even actually seen images of these things. And this is an actual AK-47, which belonged to the IRA and has been decommissioned. So it's a significant thing in itself. It's worth going to see almost for that. But in a way, that's the most positive object, because it's about the end of something really horrible.
Absolutely, yeah.
And yet, of course, in itself, it's a horrible thing. But one of the things I think will be interesting about this is it'll give you some sense of the national mood now. Do people choose a very negative object, or do they choose something that's more positive? I mean, Katie's gloves, I suppose, are the most positive one, and you can see the imagery there of, you know, the change in the role of women. I mean, it was unimaginable even 10 years ago that we would have had a woman boxer. Roddy Doyle had an extract in the Irish Times from his new the 2 pints thing that he's doing. You know, two fellas saying, you know, did you ever think we'd see today when we be cheering two moths baiting the head off each other? You know? And, no, we didn't.
Yeah.
So it's a huge change in gender and, you know, the whole idea of women. But I suppose the imagery of battling through hard times and all that, maybe people might read that into it as well. Or do they go for something a lot more negative, like the hospital bed, you know, which in a way symbolised the failure, even during the Celtic Tiger years, of public services, you know, the fact that we didn't manage to turn the place into a functioning state in many ways, even when we had the chance. So it'll be very interesting to see. So far, I was just looking at the website, I think it's just kind of gone live, and there's already about 500 or 600 votes, I think, and the one that's leading is actually the Riverdance dress, which surprises me.
Interesting.
But, you know, it'll be over a period of time, I suppose, and people haven't had a chance to go up to the museum and see the things themselves yet. But I think it'll tell us something about where we are. I would urge people, if they get a chance, I mean, you can view them all online, and it's www.100objects.ie. And you can go and have a look at that, and you can vote on that. But it's actually really nice to see the things themselves, because it triggers memories, emotions in a very different kind of way. And particularly when you see them all in conjunction with each other, it's quite a surreal exhibition, actually, you know, because they're very different kinds of things, and things you normally wouldn't see in museums.
Let me read out a few suggestions that have come in since we've been talking. Sandra in Burr says the GHD, Fintan O Toole doesn't know what a GHD is. Shock. It stands for Good Hair Day. It's a hair straightener.
Yeah, not something you would have much need for me, indeed.
I know what you're thinking, but it's been a miracle for Irish women in the last 10 years. The Padre Pio picture in every Irish kitchen with the candle at the end of the frame, that's got to be in there. That may have been one of your previous 99, was it, or the Sacred Heart picture?
We never had, but we had lots of religious objects, certainly, over the years,
call cards, people want man collecting them. Prize bonds, has anyone ever won anything? I won €75 once in the prize bonds. Mad night that was. A plain brown paper envelope. It's a cancerous icon, Irish icon since independence. Bottle of Buckfast. The Lewis number 100. Number 100. Try and fit that in the museum. The Irish Times property section from 2006. With some things up nicely.
Not at all a bad suggestion, I have to admit.
Because we don't have to be impartial about this. What would be your favourite out of the 10?
I think the one, if it was just up to me, and I had to just, as I've been picking the other ones, and I had to pick one thing, I think I probably would go for something a bit positive, you know, because you'd like to think that we will be looking back in the future,
and go on
the fact that we actually kind of got through the thing. And I think Katie Taylor's boxing gloves actually just have a lovely kind of feel to them.
It's true, because I suppose maybe in 50 years' time it might symbolise us having fought our way out of something, as well as everything else.
You know, and it was a really positive memory for us. And I think she's someone that people actually, north and south from different traditions, you know, will actually admire, which is a very nice thing. I mean, there were some of the things that didn't get in as well, though, that you kind of people have come up with great ideas. You know, the Bertie's yellow trousers, I thought was actually, I was kicking myself. Why didn't we think of that? No, I don't think Bertie would have given us his yellow trousers to go on display, but it might have been worth asking him. You know,
somebody did suggest the portrait of Cowan, which apparently is in Pat Short's bar.
Yeah.
And he'd be happy to donate it.
Yeah. Well, maybe Pat Short will do a whole exhibition in his bar. I mean, actually, genuinely, it's a really interesting thing for people to do themselves, and people could have great crack setting up their own little shrines of Irish icons and having discussions about them, because they do make you debate what the experience of the last 12 years has been and where we are now.
Okay, what's the website again?
So it's www.100objects.ie.
100objects.ie, and people can vote until when?
Until, I think it's November the 18th, so they've got about a month. We have to sort of call halt to then, because we've got to get the book done.
Book out for the Christmas market.
No, it's not coming up to March, but
all right,
the way these things work, it has to go to printers and all that.
Okay, Fintan, thanks a million for coming into us. Fintan O Toole there.